As Falcus walked through the halls of the citadel, soft thumps would resonate off the wall, those steel and iron walls that he had come to know so well. Aside from his 20 years in the academy, the citadel is where he spent the rest of his life. He knew everything there was to know about it. He knew where the ballad hall was. He knew the location of all 32 war rooms, even the ones he wasn't supposed to. And he knew where the Emperor resided. But despite his familiarity with the citadel, it had never become a home. For even the most stable foundations could not shelter him from the maelstrom that was the politics of his beloved Imperium. And now, as he entered that storm, everything became so very foreign to him. The walls, with their blue and silver lining, seemed queer and out of place to Falcus. Even the angle of their corners caused his stomach to feel ever so queasy. The lights were, to him, overly bright and caused Falcus to avert his eye down to the floor, where he was met with only dismay as it too seemed weak and bound to crumble. It was at this point that Falcus came to hear a slight buzzing, coming from the two bright ceiling fixtures. Falcus latched onto the noise and thought only of it, and what would cause it, or how he could get rid of it, as he traversed his way through the intricate halls. He cared little for the noise in truth. However, with the vial of Deimos poison weighing so heavily in his coat pocket, he dared not think of anything else. As he approached a hallway, aptly named Yalpik e Urte, or Road of Art, in more modern terms, he saw two senatorial guards facing inwards, away from him. The sight of their gold-trimmed, white-hued, volcanically forged steel armor filled Falcus with anxiety. I could still turn back, Falcus thought, stopping in his sudden panic. It's certainly not too late. He tapped his gloved fingers against a collection of medals dangling down from his heart, making them chime ever so softly. No, he resolved, grasping one of the silver bits. No, this is my time. It must be now, or it'll all be for naught. He calmed his thoughts, and with barely any hesitation stepped forward and out into the gallery. The guards, upon seeing the Princeps, raised their ceremonial halberds into the air. "Hail, Princeps Falcus!" The two chanted before bringing their weapons back down, then slapping a fist against their right shoulders. Falcus did his best to return a half-hearted wave, and, as far as he could tell, the two guards were more than content with his response, and returned to their day of standing in a hall. There were a few more groups of guards as he went down the hall, but they all did the same as the first two, and soon enough, Falcus was no longer anxious. Filling the Road of Art had become the pastime of many emperors, each trying to outdo their predecessors' art selection in some vain attempt to prove their superiority. Indeed, as Falcus went along, the art became more and more lavish. However, as he entered the section reserved for his father, the common emperor, there were no tapestries hung, no mosaics placed, no paintings, only a simple leather sheath crudely nailed to the wall, likely by his father's own hand. Whatever symbolism it was meant to represent eluded him. It could have been a statement against the vanity of those who came before him. It could be some vague message of peace or war, or it could simply be a leather sheath nailed to a wall. His father, as he had come to know, had little taste for the arts. Passing through a set of double doors, Falcus went onto a long and wide archway overlooking the courtyard. A cold wind ran into him, causing his scales to tense up and draw closer together, while the now dull light of Grondomum's binary stars waned in the distance. Their light, however, was just enough to force a huge statue of Commodus situated atop a massive column to envelop both the citadel and Falcus in shadow. Falcus paused and looked out at the likeness of his father. He loathed it, just as he did his actual father. For all the disrespect, for all the shame the fool had brought upon their house. And as he stood there, in his father's shadow, he took solace in the knowledge that he would not be there much longer. But just as he was about to leave, the door on the opposite end of the archway opened up, and a small group came forth. Striding at the head of the group was none other than Lord General Zardoin himself, followed by an entourage of 7th Regimental soldiers in their spotless yellow-green uniforms. And not far behind them came that secretary that Falcus had almost never seen the general without. The sight of him caused Falcus to tense up. There was not a more loyal follower of his father than Zardoini, nor a more cunning one. As he came near, Falcus pulled his jacket tightly and continued staring into the distance, hoping to avoid any confrontation. However, as the Lord General neared, and the whir of his automaton leggings became more prevalent, he and his group halted, and Zardoni stepped forward until he stood next to the Princeps. "What are you doing out here, my Princeps?" the Lord General questioned. "I'm going for a stroll," Falcus retorted without a moment's pause. "Ah, I see," he nodded. "Do you know the story behind it?" Zardoni asked. Excuse me?" Falcus answered after a confused silence. "The statue," he said, pointing towards it. "I know a little about it," Falcus answered with a false confidence, "although I've never taken the time to learn its history." "It's quite the tale. Let me tell it to you." Zardoni craned his neck and looked up to Falcus, who returned the look. Long ago, the imperial crown was close to being usurped by an uppity lord who, through careful plotting, was close to achieving his goal. The emperor at the time, Halleck, I believe it was constantly dealing with this lordship's claims, and despite having many capable subordinates, he refused to let them have any part in it, as he could not be assured of their loyalty. Many in his court felt that he was in too far over his head. Eventually, Halleck caught wind of his court's lack of faith and, Zardoni chuckled, well, he commissioned the construction of that pillar and a statue of himself on it, placed just like that. When dusk fell the next morning, Halleck called every noble on the planet to the citadel, and just as its shadow washed over them, he announced that they were all in his shadow and forever will be. Zardoni smiled as he finished his story and waited for a response. "And every emperor after him did the same thing, eh?" Falcus scoffed. "Seems vain to me. It did nothing against the rival noble. It's just a symbol." "I suppose so," Zardoni agreed, nodding. Although Halleck did eventually root out the spies in his court through sheer dogged determination, and soon after that secured his claim on the throne. By outwitting him, I imagine. Hardly. He bashed his head in with a dinner plate one evening. And he wasn't arrested? Who's going to arrest him? He's the emperor. The Lord General shrugged. Besides, he could kill men with dining utensils. A moment of silence passed before Zardoni spoke again. "I'm not saying that Halleck was the cleverest of Gronians, But he didn't need to be. It was his world, his domain, his shadow. He gestured towards a statue of Commodus. Envelops us all, and we would be best not to forget it. Falcus's brow furrowed. Before he could retort, Zardoni had given the Princeps a silent goodbye, stepped back into his entourage, and continued along his way. Falcus turned to watch the group distance itself from him. After a moment of pondering his meaning, Falcus shook the thought from his head and steeled himself for the task at hand. His father's chambers were not far from the archway, and after a short while Falcus found himself facing a large, ornate door. Just as the Deimos had told him, there were 2 guards there, and without hesitation opened the door as Falcus neared. He entered, and the door was brought to a close behind him. The room itself was shrouded in a kind of twilight, as if it couldn't choose a side between darkness and light. From a few lights situated along the high ceiling descended a weak light that waned as it came downwards. It was generously spacious, and could easily have held 40 or so Gronians comfortably. Situated on a far wall was a painting, showing the entire royal family, all standing proudly except for Gaius, who was held in Domitia's arms. Hanging down over the archway was a curtain of rich blue trimmed in a stony grey. Falcus passed through it and into a lounge-like room just as large as the last. Situated throughout it were benches, tables, and a bar situated in the far corner. Between the seeming emptiness of the room and strange lighting, Falcus felt uncomfortable, as if he shouldn't be there. However, the room was not empty, as he had originally thought. Sitting on a bench, facing the door, was an unmoving, hunched-over man wearing what looked to be worn-out sleep stockings. There he is, Falcus thought, and began to tap his chest anxiously. Now that I'm here, how do I actually poison him? I can't very well force it down his throat. Falcus looked about until the bar caught his eye. That should do, he murmured in relief. He strolled along the side of the room until he reached the bar, found the finest bottle of blood wine he could find, and poured the fermented blood into it. He stirred it about, and the substance congealed slightly, just as it should. Falcus moved through the furniture, poisoned wine in hand, towards his father. As he neared, he bent over slightly, trying to see Commodus's face. Father? Falcus questioned softly, nudging him on the shoulder. Commodus stirred, letting out a disgruntled moan. Leave me alone, he grunted, shaking his head back and forth. I'm the Emperor's art doing. You can't tell me to go to bed. Stop trying. He moaned again, and his facial plate opened up and started to dry heave. Falcus took a few steps back as he began to heave and said, No, not Zordorni. It's her son. Commodus continued to heave for a while longer, mandibles dangling down, touching his chest. As he recovered, he raised his head and tried to bring his facial plate back into position. His eye was bloodshot, and the skin across his face was peeling. He looked back and forth in Falcus's direction. My son, he asked, and then paused as a look of concentration overtook his visage. Gaius? No, Falcus. What are you doing here? Commodus said, taking a moment to look at the drink his son held. I came to see how you were doing, father. I was worried, Falcus remarked with false sincerity. How kind of you, Commodus responded, tilting his head slightly, followed by a series of coughs. How have you been, Father? Getting better? No, I don't believe I am. He sighed. If I had to guess, I would imagine that I am not long for this world, Falcus. After which, you shall be crowned emperor, no matter how much I disapprove. Princeps was a bit shocked by the emperor's candor. He knew that Commodus was cold towards him, but he didn't think that he outright hated him. Disapprove? Falcus questioned, betraying his anger with his tone. Why would you ever have room to disapprove of me? I've been running the Empire while you wallowed in sadness for months. But by the darkness below, I have governed more in my tenure as Princeps than you have in your entire reign. Falcus took a step forward, jabbing a finger at Commodus. You have done little and less compared to me. So tell me, Father, what have you to disapprove of me? Commodus sat and listened to his son's rant, occasionally nodding his head. When he was done, he straightened his back slightly and looked Falcus in the eye. My disapproval does not stem from a lack of merit, son, but from shame. Shame, Falcus mumbled coldly. What have I ever done to shame you? No, Falcus. It's not about what you've done. Commodus heaved again, but his plate stayed in place. It's about what I failed at. Because of me, you have become vain, angry, prideful, arrogant, pompous, and you have adopted all the traits of our people's nobility. You have become a slave to the Citadel. The Emperor shivered. But other than the shame I have placed upon you, you have arisen to the occasion. You've met it bravely and have become clever and ruthless against those opposing you. You have made me proud, Falcus. Perhaps not in the way I would have liked, but in your own. I have given you shame and betrayed your mother. The Princeps stared at his father, unsure on what to do next. The glass in his hand suddenly became very heavy, and he was forced to lay it down on the table. He still felt anger towards the man, but it wasn't the same as it had been before. Father, I'm thirsty, Falcus, Commodus said in a tired voice. What? I could go for a good glass of wine, son. He gestured toward the glass on the table. How about you hand it to me? Falcus looked down at the glass and then back up, now filled with uncertainty. Father, I don't think you'd enjoy this wine very well. It may be spoiled. Commodus sat fully up and shook his head. No, Falcus. I think it's exactly what both of us want. The Princeps paused for the moment, but between his own uncertainties and Commodus's glare, he submitted and brought the glass over to his father, placing it in his pale hand. Good. Now, if you would be so kind, I'd like to be alone with my drink. Falcus nodded stiffly and headed towards the exit as quickly as his stride would take him. However, just as he was about to go through the curtain, Commodus called out, Falcus! Falcus turned around, looking at his father, now standing by leaning himself on the table, holding the drink high with the other hand. May the Emperor's reign never end.